Hey everyone, welcome back. And if you're new to the channel, welcome on board. I'm very happy that you managed to find my little creative corner of the internet. Today I want to discuss something that has been sitting in the back of my mind for a while now. It is a topic that sparked a surprisingly strong reaction in the comments in one of my previous videos. And in that video, I mentioned that, in my experience, most artists do not actively gatekeep their work. And I said that many artists are actually quite approachable and willing to answer questions if you ask them respectfully. Now, someone responded very firmly to this, and to which, first of all, thank you so much, because this conversation really feels like one of the important ones to have. So again, thanks. I want to dive into the reaction and my thoughts to that reaction. So without further ado, welcome back to another Butcher Shop. Before we begin, I want to take a brief moment to thank the people who support this channel over on Patreon. Your support genuinely allows me to spend time thinking about these kind of topics, and recording these discussions and continuing to explore what it means to grow as an artist in public. I never take that for granted, so if you are one of these people backing the channel, thank you so much for believing in the work I do and for helping keep this creative space alive. Let's dive in. Today I want to explore the disagreement I just explained to you in the introduction. Not to argue for the sake of arguing, or not to be right or to win anything, but to examine the idea honestly and explain why I still believe what I believe. The core question we are really asking here is fairly simple. Are artists generally accessible, or is the art world built on guarded knowledge and unspoken hierarchy? The comment I received presented a very specific claim. It suggested that access to meaningful conversations is conditional, and that respect must be earned through visible skill. That established artists protect their knowledge because sharing it would create rivals. On the surface, that perspective is not entirely irrational. Creative industries can feel very competitive. And social media reinforces visible hierarchies through follower counts and engagement metrics. So it can be very intimidating to approach someone whose work feels leagues beyond your own. When you admire someone deeply, it is easy to imagine that they exist behind some sort of invisible barrier. So I understand how that perception can take form. However, understanding where an idea comes from does not mean I specifically agree with it. My own lived experience has consistently pointed in another direction. And so I want to be very clear about something before I go any further. I am not claiming that my experience represents universal truth. I am also not suggesting that no one has ever encountered gatekeeping. I am simply saying that my own encounters with artists, including artists far beyond my current level, have overwhelmingly been defined by openness rather than secrecy. So, over the years, I've had the opportunity to speak with artists whose technical and conceptual abilities are far beyond my own. These people are not like casual hobbyists. They are individuals whose work has influenced countless others, including my own. I've shared a panel about the use of generative AI with Iris Compete, whose illustrations and atmospheric storytelling demonstrate a level of craft that just commands respect. I've also spoken with Julie Melan, whose mastery of watercolors and dedication to process reveal years of discipline and experimentation. I've spoken to Alex Alice, whose designs and also again whose mastery with watercolors just reflect a profound understanding of both illustration and storytelling. And in each of these conversations, I asked questions that were sincere and rooted in curiosity. I wanted to understand their approach to their materials, their reasoning behind certain compositional decisions, the way they structure their workflow, how they navigate creative challenges. And at no point did I feel dismissed. Iris is kind of known to spend time with whole groups of artists, students, and God knows whoever during the playground event here in the Netherlands in Eindhoven. She is extraordinary in how she reviews portfolios and how she provides feedback to what she is, being shown. So yeah, at no point did I sense that my questions were unwelcome or that I had to prove my worth, before being taken seriously. When I asked about techniques, they explained them. And when I inquired about tools, they described them and the use of them. So when I wondered how they approached specific problems, they articulated their thought process very well. They did not respond defensively. They did not withhold information under the assumption that I might somehow become a threat, at least to my knowledge. And I can't imagine how that would go, because I've also seen many lectures of these people, and many other artists went to the IMAG Art Festival last year in Paris, and these people are doing live demos. They're presenting things, they're painting in front of a live audience, and it's being broadcasted to the big screen. At that point, where are the secrets? Where are you going to put your secrets? It's ass out. It's just, you can only show what you can show, and it's happening right there under your nose. So yeah, I've never seen that sort of gatekeeping, and even here locally, I have extended discussions with people like Robin Roosendaal and Pam Hagen, who we share a critique group with. These are all artists that I consider much better than myself. I respect them a lot. And these people are known to take time for you. So those conversations were very generous and thoughtful. And they shared insights about material and mindset, even personal struggles within the industry. These were not transactional exchanges. There was no immediate benefit for them in explaining their process to me. They were not gaining exposure. They were not leveraging the interaction for publicity. They simply engaged in a conversation about art. And that pattern has repeated itself often enough that I cannot dismiss this as a coincidence. Now, I want to address something important. I am aware that my experience is very subjective. I understand that other artists may have encountered situations where they felt excluded or even dismissed. I do not intend to invalidate those experiences. I would be arrogant to claim that because I have largely encountered openness, everyone else must have as well. It's weird. So it is entirely possible that I have been fortunate in, the people that I approached. And I am open to the idea that my perspective might appear naive to some. I think I can very much be naive at times. However, I do not think that optimism should automatically be equated with ignorance. Choosing to believe that many artists are willing to share knowledge is not the same as denying that gatekeeping exists. It is simply choosing not to let the fear of it dominate my outlook. So in my experience, many artists understand that roles within creative conversations are fluid. In one moment, they may be the more experienced voice offering guidance, and at another moment, they may find themselves learning from someone else, less technically advanced, but rich in conceptual insight or alternative perspective. Artistic hierarchy is not fixed. It shifts constantly depending on context. So, what does sharing secrets really mean? A large part of this debate revolves around the idea of secrets, I think. The suggestion that artists protect their secrets implies that there is some hidden formula responsible for their success. It assumes that technique can be reduced to a set of guarded instructions that, if revealed, would instantly elevate someone else to the same level. And I don't think that is true. If an artist tells you exactly which brush they use and which pigments they mix, which digital settings they prefer, or how they structure a piece from sketch to finish, you still cannot replicate their lived experience. You cannot reproduce the thousands of hours of experimentation that shaped their instinct, their handwriting. You cannot duplicate their personal taste and their influences, nor their failures, or their internal narrative voice. Technique can be taught. Handwriting cannot. And by handwriting, I mean your style. I call it handwriting, but it goes further than writing. It's like a specific brush technique, the way your hand moves, the way you work your way through coloring processes, etc. So when every artist openly describe their workflow in detail, what they're offering is, I think, a vocabulary, not a replacement. They are expanding your understanding of possibility, and they are not handing over a shortcut to mastery. In fact, when experienced artists articulate their process, they often discover new clarity about their own decisions. I have had this happen to myself so many times while recording videos and looking back at my own work, thinking, why the hell did I do it this way? Knowing that there was a much more efficient way, at hand. Talking about art also means reflecting on art, to examine habits that might otherwise remain unconscious. That reflective process can strengthen their craft as much as, the person talking with them. So sharing knowledge is not equivalent to surrendering advantage. It is often an opportunity, I think, for growth on both sides. So, all right. Let us examine the idea that sharing knowledge creates competition and therefore poses a threat. This assumes that art operates within a strictly limited economy of attention and success. It suggests that if someone else improves, your own value diminishes. And I don't really see evidence that creative inspiration functions that way. Art is not a zero-sum game. There is not a finite amount of appreciation available, and there is not a fixed number of opportunities that must be protected at all costs. When more artists improve, the overall quality of conversation rises, I think. The community becomes more vibrant, standards increase, and with them, the potential for innovation. So if someone becomes stronger because you help them, that does not erase your own growth. It may challenge you to evolve further, but challenge is not the same as threat, at least I believe. So furthermore, insecurity can sometimes masquerade as strategic caution. An artist who fears being replaced might guard information, but that fear often reveals more about their internal state than about the actual danger posing by sharing. So confidence tends to be generous and insecurity tends to be protective. Is this a rule? No. Does this apply to everyone? Also no. But I do believe this is something that can generally be experienced. But when an artist engages in open dialogue, I think several things happen. First of all, ideas sort of cross-pollinate. Someone might approach a familiar problem from an unfamiliar angle. And seemingly, a basic question can reveal assumptions you never questioned before. A beginner's curiosity can prompt an experienced artist to articulate reasoning that had become automatic. Second, community strengthens. I think creative work can be isolating at times. You spend long hours in a studio or behind a screen, and it can narrow your perspective. That's not a bad thing, but I do think that conversations with other artists reintroduce external input, and challenge stagnation. Third, I think enthusiasm can spread through conversations. Genuine excitement about process and discovery is very contagious. I've seen this many times, even in again, this is all subjective and all very personal, but in a group of artists, one of us was very enthusiastically, making new block prints. And like within a week, everybody was making new block prints simply because that enthusiasm was very contagious. And we were all curious and we all wanted to share in the discovery. Sometimes that energy can reignite motivation on both sides. Have I walked away from conversations thinking I was the one seeking guidance, only to realize that the exchange had been mutually energizing? Yes, I have. Sometimes you don't realize a conversation was a catalyst to something much bigger after you got home, sat down, and thought about the day. There are a few episodes, actually, quite a lot, now that I think about it, that come from a conversation during a convention or a question a fan asked me. And again, like I use these episodes of The Butcher Shop to reflect on my own work as much as I try to share those reflections and conclusions, with you. So this reciprocal dynamic undermines the idea that mentorship is strictly a hierarchy thing. It is not always a top-down transfer of wisdom. Sometimes it is a horizontal exchange that benefits both participants. Still, I want to approach this discussion with nuance. If someone has experienced gatekeeping, that experience should not be dismissed lightly. I feel really bad that this person has experienced it, because feeling excluded or condescended, it all can be very discouraging. Especially from emerging artists who are ready, who are very vulnerable about their work. There may indeed be environments where competition is intense and generosity is scarce. Certain industries and markets or social circles may foster protective behavior. Artists are human, and humans can be very territorial, particularly in unstable economic landscapes. However, isolated experiences do not define an entire field, and this statement very much goes both ways. The fact that I've only had positive experiences does not mean everybody only has positive experiences, and the other way around as well. My concern, though, is that assuming universal hostility can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you approach every conversation expecting dismissal, you may project defensiveness or hesitation that shapes the interaction. The way you approach these things really matters. So, my advice would be that be genuine and be curious, because both these things tend to be recognized. Respectful questions often receive respectful answers. Demonstrating that you are actively working on your own growth signals seriousness in a way that skill level alone does not. Effort communicates commitment. So, if you are an emerging artist who feels intimidated about reaching out to someone you admire, I encourage you to reconsider the assumption that you must first prove yourself worthy. Approach respectfully. Ask specific questions at opportunities that are very inviting of, conversation. This can be at conventions, it could be at lectures, maybe even at a social media post. Ask those questions directly. Demonstrate that you have already attempted to solve the problem yourself and show genuine interest rather than entitlement. You may be surprised by the response. Even if the conversation is brief, even if the answer is simple, you gain insight that would otherwise remain inaccessible. Growth, I think, or I believe, often begins with a question. And so, I dare conclude that art thrives in dialogue. Techniques evolve through shared exploration. Movements emerge from communities, not isolated individuals guarding formulas in silence. The myth of the solitary genius protecting secrets is compelling, but it does not align with what I have witnessed. I have seen artists engage generously, reflect openly, and treat conversation as an opportunity rather than a risk. If believing in accessibility makes me appear optimistic or naive, I guess I'm comfortable with that. I would rather build my creative life on the assumption of generosity than on suspicion. The art world I have experienced is one of shared curiosity and of mutual respect and continuous exchange, and that is the world I intend to contribute to. If you have had any experiences, I genuinely want to hear them. Conversations like this are important because they shape how emerging artists perceive the community they are entering. They influence whether someone feels encouraged to ask questions or pressured into silence. If you believe in open dialogue and collaborative growth, embody that in your own interactions. Be the artist who answers questions thoughtfully. Be the artist who remembers what it is like to struggle at the beginning. And you know what? Struggle is not only something that signifies the beginning. I think your entire life as an artist is struggle. I think that's the whole point of art. So be the artist who understands that sharing knowledge does not diminish your voice. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and for engaging in the discussion. I really appreciate every thoughtful comment, even the ones that challenge my perspective, because they really push the conversation forward. I'll see you in the next video, guys. Take care.